That's right. Okay. Okay. Are we in there? Yeah. Good evening, dear friends. It's good of all of you to come, and on a Sunday evening when everyone would rather be sort of mellowing down for the new week. This program, this talk is part of a month-long effort that we've launched here in the RJC to carefully address issues surrounding the most important work which we will probably ever do. That is raising good children and good grandchildren. The themes of the Parshios which we are currently studying go back again and again to something that Moshe Rabbeinu realized, and that is that the experience which had been had by people who had been in Egypt was very different from the experience which was had by people who were in the wilderness. And that epic which would soon be unfolding without him, the experience of the people in the land of Israel, would be unlike either of the preceding two. Everything in the culture, in the cosmos, would be different, and people would have to adjust to that. But at the same time, there was the firm and unshakable belief that the new locus was not only a place where adjustments would be required, but where there were new opportunities, where a world changing was not necessarily a world deteriorating, and that the challenge would have to be met, and that God would be there to meet the challenge with us. The notion of a landscape utterly changed is also the theme of one of the most famous prophetic passages that we have, featured as the Haftorah for the 8th day of Pesach in the diaspora and for Yom HaAtzmaut in Israel, and that is the vision of Isaiah in the 11th chapter. And I'd like to focus on one curious passage there. Maybe it's most famous. It's been the subject of treatment in art, literature. The pasuk describes this new and perfect world. V'gor ze'ev im keves, v'nomer im gedid yerbatz. And the kid, the lamb will live with the wolf, and the leopard will sport with the kid. Ve'egel ukfir umari yachdav, and the cub and the young lion and the young calf will be together. V'nar katon noheg ba, and as it concludes the vision, a little child will lead them. This sense of the little child in this picture is a very particular one, because there's something missing in the picture. There is no parent. The world is in the hands of a child. And this doesn't seem to frighten anyone. And ranged about him are the figures of the wild animals which represent the most terrifying forces of the world, all of the threats from which parents normally struggle to protect their children and themselves, and the wolf and the lion, etc. And not only is the child present, not only in the next verses is the child playing at the den of the asp, the child is conducting the harmony. The child is the center of the symphony of forces. And it is that image, nar katon noheg ba, that image of this powerful child, that the prophet Yeshayahu holds out to us as what will develop under the kingdom of the Mashiach in the days to come. And so, it would seem that this prophecy tells us that as we approach the perfect world, there are going to be profound changes in the nature of childhood and in the capacities of children. And rather than being something to terrify, these are things which are held out as the most optimistic hopes and visions. Thus far, the good news. The idea that a changing world, that a changing set of circumstances is not necessarily a world spinning out of control. And that a new world which requires a new response, almost as an article of faith, requires optimism, as opposed to thinking that we can ever lurch children back into an earlier world. We have to deal with the repositioning of the Zev, Keves, the Nomer, etc. And now for the reality that we have been trying to cushion you against. If you broadly trace the history of the developing world from before the Industrial Revolution until now, you'll see a great shift. Before the Industrial Revolution, the patriarchate, the centrality of adult male domination, was supported by a very simple reality. And that is that the economy was an economy of physical strength. People who could push the plow, the people who could carry the sacks of grain, people who could defend the city in the case of siege, they were at the head of the pecking order. With the Industrial Revolution, with the introduction of machinery, things began to shift. And economy was much more based on skill than it was on brute force. As the world developed beyond that, with the advent of not only the computer age, but actually, to a certain extent, the advent of inexpensive printing, but accelerated by the computer age, the world became an economy of knowledge. And in this economy of knowledge, roles definitely changed. So that now, for example, in many areas of graduate study, the new affirmative action is to hold enough places for males, because by meritocracy, many of these kinds of studies would be completely dominated by females who are well equipped to work in the economy of knowledge. That, of course, has caused shifts in power and in role. But in this technology-driven age of information, things have gone a step further. And that is that with the advent of inexpensive micro-technology, the notion of power, the ability to affect things, the ability to be an independent variable, has actually transcended the economics of being a money producer, such that many of the power tools of the new world are in the hands of very young people. It is not the unusual family whose 9 and 10 and 11-year-old has to tell the parents how to use the various gadgets that the house contains. In addition, society as it races forward is conspiring to place these great powers in younger and younger hands. I was talking to a very serious, thoughtful family here in our community, and they told me their experience that with their children, their practice is that their children get a cell phone when they begin riding the city buses on their own. Reasonable, so they can know that their children are safe and where they are, etc. They asked that their children be given cell phones, but without internet connection, without that service. They had to twist themselves into pretzels to locate telephones which would still be even made available without the connection, and we're told that within 2 years from now, there will just be no such phones. And so the choice of putting that instrument into the hands of a youngster will come automatically bundled with attaching that child to the universe of the internet. We have to come to grips with the fact that any child, any person who has two of a computer with internet access, a credit card, and a cellular telephone is a very, very powerful force and has opportunities, some good, some not so wholesome, afforded to him or to her that have changed the ground rules. Now, we can do one of two things. Facing this newly empowered child, we can try to continue to exert control, to preserve at least early adolescence as a time of relative innocence going forward. Or we can recognize that there is a new force in the world, and that for all intents and purposes, control, I'm not talking about influence, the control of adolescence is almost at an end. And parents who seek to rule with an iron fist will find that the opposition is extraordinarily well armed. There are other factors which are at work as well, if we are to honestly describe the new landscape. One, we have been rendered constitutionally resistant, phobic to boredom. We require a constant diet of entertainment. The iPhone is a perfect example. At any given moment, any self-respecting person has to have access to a Kindle with 7 different books and a few episodes of some television programs and possibly some books on audio books. So far I'm only describing mine. And here's where mine doesn't quite measure up. An assortment of games, lest any given moment be without entertainment. This is a kind of a jolly cartoon of what used to be the masmid, who always had a holy book, a sefer available, not to waste a single moment. We are masmidim of play, fearful of silence and disengagement. And this has had effects up and down. In the world of younger children, in early childhood and latency, it has caused parents to project their own fear of boredom to the constantly entertained, constantly programmed child, moving from activity to activity. Just look at what has happened to birthday parties. Birthday parties are an industry. And they are industries of growing out of this entertainment-addicted child. The other manifestation of this, you can see anytime you want. Please feel free to collect data in any shul, including ours. We use food as a kind of a constant oral stimulus. I don't know why we don't just have the children in the shul hooked up to intravenous sugar. Because whereas once upon a time, and I have harangued about this in the past, I won't bore you with the whole thing, but it's part of a much larger concept. Once upon a time, those little children, you came to shul, you got a treat. A treat meant that if you were good for a period of time, if you were... I remember getting the one candy and holding it until I couldn't bear to wait any longer. And then basically slowing down my salivary process by an act of will to force it to last as long as I possibly could. Because afterwards was only after. I honestly think, I see kids in shul who are never at any moment without a lollipop stick in their mouths. Some of them would make excellent birdhouses because the perch is permanent. But the idea is that the moment without cannot be tolerated. And that is akin to the notion of an endless stream of stimulation, which we have taught ourselves to require. Now understand, when adolescence begins, that process moves in other directions, and among many, even young adolescents, there is a kind of hypersocial, and in many cases, hypersexual need for the same kind of constancy of excitement and stimulation, leading to addictive behaviors in the realm of Facebook and other things going on in the internet. And these things are very hard to stop. They're very hard to disengage. Now, in painting this, I guess you could think, bleak picture of children over whom our control, our simple ability to exercise control is going to lapse much before it did traditionally. Whole pieces of life experience are going to fall into the soup. So I'll give you for an example. These new adolescents are also cut off from traditional influences. If you look at watch a movie like James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. Well, that is a movie which, among other things, catalogs the movement of a father figure into the kind of mentoring role of the collapsed father, played by the late Jim Backus, Mr. Magoo. The police officer takes that role. In other great films of the same period, which dwelt upon the turbulent adolescent of the 50s, it is a teacher who moves into that role. Replacement adults coming into the lives of adolescents is almost a thing of the past. Our society's obsession with preventing unhealthy relationships, with shutting down potential predators and molesters, has created a societal suspicion on the part of children, of all adults, save those who are members of the family. Furthermore, the movement in society which has caused generations to shift in 15-minute intervals, the super demography, meaning people cohering in very narrow bands of age and interest, has meant that the secret weapon discovered by the late Dr. Abraham Stern, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, when he invented the Shabbaton, when he invented the concept of Torah Leadership Seminar, which gave us NCSY and other important instruments, all of these predicated on the notion that there was a figure older than a peer and younger than an adult, someone in late teens or 20s who could have a marked influence on young adolescents. That model is also endangered. It's also endangered. If you would hear what now constitutes counselor orientation at the better camps, you would be nauseous, because the suspicion which has cut generations adrift from one another has made these camps very, very nervous about anything which could possibly be construed as untoward contact, and the kids are getting the same message. As a result, these new powerful super teens are also almost untouchable, even by the surrogates of parenting. I think this is going to have a cataclysmic effect on the year in Israel, which is changing for many other reasons. But children who are taught distrust are going to be responding very differently to people who come to them with a message of rethinking their values and their world, because there's not going to be enough connection and relationship to allow for that to happen. So what does that mean? If even a fraction of what I'm saying is going to be the truth, it's going to be the reality, what is our strategy? Well, I think the first realization is for us to continue to believe that we are going to do our most important work, our heavy lifting, during the years of high school and even junior high school. We are talking about efforts which are going to be too little and too late, and which are going to be undermined by all the forces I've just described. It does mean that there has to be a refocus on the most crucial years of a child's life, the years of early childhood and of latency. And we have to devise strategies for training children, for inculcating values and belief systems that will allow children to take their power with a greater level of responsibility and commitment. We have to recognize that we have responded in many, many cases to the period of latency with parental dormancy. The idea that parents have to be proactive is triggered only by crisis. Parents don't treat their 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds as people being prepared for a terrible, lonely, hard journey. Believe me, if you knew that your 7-year-old was going to be blasted into outer space at the age of 11 without you, you would teach that child every possible skill set that you could imagine in order to make sure that when they were on that capsule alone, they would know how to make themselves okay. You know, the greatest hero of Jewish educational history, in my opinion, is, particularly in the context of this discussion, the greatest hero is Yocheved, the mother of Moshe Rabbeinu. Yocheved knew that she had that gifted little boy only as long as he needed her milk. Maybe age 4. Maybe she could stretch it to age 5. And in those years, she would have to, by way of her lullabies, her stories, her lessons, pack him with everything that he would need to maintain himself as a Hebrew growing up in the court of Pharaoh. And she was successful, because she knew that her time was limited. I mean, history has shown us horrible, inspiring examples of little children who were torn away from their families at the age of 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and hidden with Christians during the Shoah. And after the war, when the rabbis would go through the convents and say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, the little children would run into their arms and say, Mama, Mama. Because someone had managed to plant the seed deep enough. I don't know what our children would respond to. Something about a purple dinosaur, maybe. But the challenge of this period is to end parental dormancy during the period of latency. That means we need to ask ourselves, what is in the child before adolescence begins? Could not be coming at a worse time. Many grandparents are physically distant, have minimal time to overlay what parents struggling to make a living and get on with things might not have a chance to do. And the parents themselves are often much too busy, almost frantic, in many, many homes, the discussion of whether mothers should have careers. It's not a theological discussion. It's not a statement of ideology. It's a simple economic necessity. And beyond this, many of the parents are locked in ripples of unending adolescence. We've made childhood and adolescence so attractive that no one wants to leave them. Certainly no one wants to enter middle age. It is the least attractive phase of life by all standards of media. Who wants to be in the middle age? Middle age, I know what it is. It's terrible. I mean, I'm not suffering that much. But if you try to be young, you're a creep. If you embrace the fact that you're old, you're a loser. Farfal. There's no place for the middle anymore. And so everyone always tries to hold on as if being young forever is the great cause of life. Sometimes I wonder, we have a new phenomenon. It's like metrosexual orthodoxy, where a whole generation of gelled parents. I mean, you look at, the fathers are so pretty. But, if you got your image, you don't want your tzitzis getting in the way of that wonderful cleavage and the open neckline. And so the imaging of parental parents has been largely compromised. We're also addicted to multitasking. Parenting doesn't do well with that, Don't tell yourself that you're doing something important with your child while you use the carriage as the mechitza behind which you talk on the phone while pushing them on a walk. What should we be doing with childhood? That's a fair question. Let's talk about some realizable techniques and goals. Goal number 1. Children need a universe populated by the magic of stories and songs. Children need music around them. Jewish music, preferably, but all music in a pinch. Because, it takes a lot of work on the part of schools to convince kids that learning is boring. Because that is an unnatural fact. The same people who were teaching reading in Chumash, never mind, I'm not going to say that. This might get around. I'll have the teachers picketing outside. Suffice it to say, there is a moment when children learn that it is now boring to learn, which is a moment of tragic collapse. But you can get in before that moment. The songs that are bits of the prayers, the Zmiros of Shabbos, can be introduced almost under the skin. It can become part of the landscape of imagination. The stories. They're such beautiful stories. The stories of the Talmud, the wise men of Chelm, the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, the stories of all of the great tzaddikim. These stories need to be saturating our world, if we're going to have a chance at promulgating values. And children need to talk about the things that are important. For one, God. God needs to be mentioned. He needs to be a welcome guest in the house. And he needs to be portrayed not only as the force of the all-knowing punisher. He needs to be presented as the loving Father. The one who's been watching over you since you were a baby. The description of how you were born to us should always include Hashem blessed us and you were his most wonderful present. You need to talk about him so that someday children will speak to him as easily as they speak to someone standing next to him. You know, I often think one of our core issues, we really, you know, it's not like we neglect the issue of children. We're obsessed with parenting. We overdo it. But you know what? We shouldn't be raising children. We should be raising parents. If we would ask ourselves, who is that little person beside me going to be when they have a person beside them? Are they going to have what it takes to care about passing things on? To be assuring? We need to worry about our children's skills. I remember a fateful day. Was actually, you know how sometimes you remember moments when your life changed. I must have been in the 3rd grade. And I had already started sitting beside my father in the big shul. Now let me just tell you, lest you think I was some kind of a prodigy of holiness, let me tell you how I got to the big shul. I got to the big shul because they started me off in children's services. And I was the rabbi's grandson. And I was as spoiled could be. And I got away with murder. So all the other kids had to sit down. And I got to sort of stand up and strut my stuff. And this poor man, who was a Holocaust survivor, I realized that whatever Hitler hadn't finished, I took a big share of. And poor Mr. Spector, should rest in peace, was up there trying to get these children to listen to him, which didn't always work out so well. And I was about 3 or 4. And I just sort of went and stood next to him. And while he was talking, I tied him to the bima by his tzitzis. I was sure that the death penalty awaited me if I ever returned to children's services again. And so, armed with nothing but the aforementioned single butterscotch candy, I began to try to sit through the davening in the main shul. It was only the threat of some bodily harm that got me there. In any case, I was in the 3rd grade. We didn't learn Hebrew so early. I was in the 3rd grade, and I had already taken to davening, sort of. You know, when everyone stood for Shemona Esrei, I took the book, and I guess I shuckled. I don't know what I did. I remember one evening, my father calls me into his bedroom. Now, my father was, many of you knew him. My father was the most mellow. He wasn't a fire breather. He wasn't anyone you would assume would be practicing, like religious coercion. But my father was a very honest person. He hated like bluffers. So he brought me into his room. He says, I see you've been davening. I said, yeah. He says, he's waiting for me with a Shiloh Siddur. He opens it to Tikanta Shabbos. He says, read to me. Well, probably took the dentist 3 visits to recover the teeth that I broke in that. He says, you're standing there, you're davening. You're not even reading the words correctly. You're going to read to me until I hear that it sounds like it's supposed to sound. And then you can shuckle and do whatever you want, but at least you'll be reading the words. And my father would call me in and ask me to read to him. Not new things, things I claimed I was already davening. That changed my life. Because I started to come to shul. And my Rebbe Shlita always says, the problem is not that people don't understand. The problem is that people don't understand what it means to understand. So at least I began to understand what it meant to daven. It wasn't all bluff and cant. You know, when I have the poppers, our wonderful young girls who meet with me at Shalashuda's time to learn about davening skills, I always tell them about Winnie, Winnie, Winnie. Because there was this lovely man who used to sit behind me in shul. And I always envied him. Because I thought he was the fastest davener in the world. He used to go, Winnie, 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 Winnie. It was amazing. I mean, the guy was like, he was like the, like the Superman of daveners. Until one day I listened a little more closely and I heard Winnie, 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 Ashrei, Winnie, 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 Yoshvei. The Winnie, Winnie, Winnie was just filler. There was nothing going on in the Winnies. And once in a while he would get a word in. So I always tell the girls, if you're in a foreign shul, and you want to let them know you're serious, just go Winnie, Winnie, Winnie for a while. Everyone will think you're a great davener. My father taught me that there really was a thing called davening. We make a terrible mistake. We're afraid for our children to experience any discomfort. I had the most wonderful friend in Yerushalayim, Mr. Cohn, Meyer Cohn. I used to learn with him once a week when I was in the Grus Kollel. He was well in his 80s. He had been in Tucson, Arizona. He once told me that during all the years when he was in Tucson, no Jew ever spent a night in jail. That he would personally vouch. There was even once a Jew was accused of murder. And on his say-so, the judge let him out. This man loved Yiddishkeit. He wasn't super learned, but he loved it. He davened like an angel. And I used to ask him, how'd you get to be that way? He says, because I had a father. My father was a milkman who learned in Slobodka. And my father would be up every morning at 4 a.m. to sit and learn until it was time to go out. And when it came time at 5:30 to go to shul, my father would come and touch me on the shoulder and say, Meyer, you have to get up and go to shul. And he says, I didn't have a choice. And it was cold and it was dark. But the father, by not indulging the desire to sleep, was saying to the child, I believe in your core strength. You're tough enough to get up and go to shul with me. You're made of the same stuff I am. And we now have Bli Ainor, we have on Sunday morning a 9 o'clock minyan. And it's a wonderful minyan. And we have many wonderful young people there. I won't lie. But you know what? I think every one of those kids who's got the Sidurim with those cute covers and from the Sidur play, why aren't they there? Because someone thinks they need a little more sleep. More than they need sleep. They need the gravel in their gut to know that they can live without it. And that no matter what time their Abba went to sleep on Saturday night, my Abba never misses shul on Shabbos morning. They need that so that they have something from which to draw the belief in themselves. The belief that they are good enough not only to get up in the morning because their father taps them, but the belief that they're good enough to get up in the morning when all of their friends are lying around them at a sleepover, asleep. that they're good enough to be the only one who doesn't follow the pack when the pack leaves the road. We need to build it in. We also need a discourse of values. You know, there's a conversation to have after a play date. Your 7-year-old has a 7-year-old over for lunch. Ask, what kind of person do you think she is? Is she a kind girl? We used to ask our kids this all the time. Not to say, Lashon, we didn't have an opinion. What do you think? Is this a kind person? Is this an honest person? Kid comes home from school and says, Tati, I'm upset. Something happened on the bus today. Something happened on the bus. All the boys were making fun of this boy. So what'd you do? I don't think I did anything, Tati. I was afraid they would make fun of me. You didn't do anything? Well, I didn't make fun. I should hope not. You didn't do anything? You don't have to punish. You don't have to threaten. You just leave that question hanging there. You didn't do anything? And that child's going to be all right. My son still has dear, dear, dear friends. Because once in a while there was a kid who needed someone to stick up for him. My son was that child. And in their 20s, they are still inseparable. But that has to be a line of discourse. Is that child honorable? We have to talk about honor. You don't have to punish children. Not the way we think. Usually not. Once you have established a discourse based on values, those kinds of questions like the one I mentioned, the question of honor, did you dishonor yourself? How could you do that? One time, one of my kids, who will go nameless, problem in school. Something about looking at somebody else's paper or something like that. And the teacher called me and said, they were embarrassed, the rabbi. They said, had this situation. I said, throw the book out. Whatever you want to do, we will support. That is inexcusable in our house. You tell me about dishonest. Do whatever you want to do. We'll support you. Teacher calls me back a little while later. He said, Rabbi, I have a problem. I can't think of a punishment because when I made your child call you and explain what he or she had done, I have never seen a child in more pain. I can't devise any punishment as much as the pain of having to tell you that they had been involved in something of this nature. If you create a discourse of honor, which means you don't lie to kids, and you don't expect kids to lie to you. It also, by the way, means that the way children learn, the two most important gears of human social progress, apology and forgiveness. The only way they learn these is by example. You hear a parent say, I jumped to a conclusion. I was unjust to you. I apologize. To hear parents say, I see you're truly sorry. Forget about it. Let it go. Forgiven. They learn to move in these gears. A child who has been schooled in honor can be sent into the world or into outer space because they have been armed. I believe that as individuals and as a community, we also need to recognize that there are entire skill sets that our society is depriving children of. You know, there's a whole new literature about the very important value of boredom. I spoke about it a little bit before. Boredom means a time when you are not programmed, a time when you are left to your own devices. It is when children are, thank God, bored that they construct tent cities in their bedrooms out of blankets and chairs. It's when children are bored that they make up games where they take on the personalities of characters. It's when children are bored, God help us, that they lock the bathroom door and make potions out of every single substance that they can find just to see what will happen. The fact that my brother and I did not blow ourselves up as children is a near miracle. But we didn't even recognize how wonderful it was that we had this expansive area where we had to call our imaginations to our service because we were so bored. When else is someone going to actually look up and see that the clouds kind of look like shapes of things? Or close their eyes real hard and realize that they kind of see colors when they push their palms against their eyelids? Or ask themselves, is everything real? Or is everybody just pretending to play a part? Is my teacher really my teacher? You can go crazy places with a bored mind. We also need to teach them how to use time differently. You know why no one likes learning Gemara today? Because our brains are modems. And the modems have been sped up to take in things so quickly that the idea of taking 3 lines of text and growing it like a culture in a petri dish until its ambiguities begin to bloom, and we see that it's not simple, and that it's not obvious, and that it's rich and textured and fragrant. Who has time? Who knows how to read that slowly unless we go back and teach? And look at Shabbos afternoon. Look at the experience of Shabbos. Why is everyone so shocked that teenagers are accessing their computers and their telephones when we haven't taught them how to use that time? I think we need an aggressive Shabbos time texturing program. That means more and better board games, which include the family. It means a rich diet of stories. My father, Zichron Livracha, every Friday night and Shabbos, I realized how tired he must have been after lunch. He made a whole collection of folk tales of the world and would regale us with the stories of Anansi the spider from Africa and the terrible Oli from Norway, and mixed among them the wise men of Chelm, and stop every once in a while on a hard word and ask us, what does that word mean? And we would go, and he would say, you're supposed to stop me when you don't know a word. And guess what? You do that for enough years, you learn some words. But you also, you learn how to fill time with sweetness. My father used to take us on Shabbos afternoon. Up the block from us in Baltimore was this beautiful Lake Ashburton, which was really just a reservoir. And it had a sidewalk all the way around. And my father would take us and hold my hand and my brother Aaron's, Danny wasn't born yet, and walk with us all the way around the Lake Ashburton. And he would tell us stories. He would sing us songs in all sorts of different languages, songs which if we ever repeated them to any of our peers, it would have been what my children call social suicide. But with my father, it was pure delight. And he would explain things to us, like how automobile engines work, and things in history. Just to pass the time as we walk together. The walks to and from shul, we lived about 3 blocks away, were priceless. And as a result, the time of Shabbos, all my life, never was something that hung heavy and empty and flaccid. There was never enough Shabbos. I think we're going to have to declare war, frankly, on the 3 and 4 hour Shabbos naps. Because I think our poor parents of today, are so exhausted that they are just collapsing after lunch to try to repair themselves after murderous weeks. But they have to know. That's when Shabbos ends for the children. And parents taking their kids to the park so the parents can socialize and kids just play. And play is a good thing. But play, and usually with over-attentive parents making sure, don't climb too high and don't fall and don't this and don't that, can ruin play as well. You have to think about these things. Because it is my prayer, not that we attempt to thrust children back into the amolig, once upon a time style of childhood and adolescence. I mean, the first half of adolescence for most of the past half century has been devoted to frustration because, you were too young to do most of the things that looked like they would really be fun, and you just waited until you got your car or your this or your that, and you could go and have fun. Well, guess what? In the age of Facebook and the super child or the super adolescent, they're not waiting. Just get real. They're not waiting. And so that whole period of suspension in which parents had a great deal of control is largely over. This new child, this new adolescent is waiting for Yocheved, is waiting for the parents who are going to pack the first part of childhood, so full of values and examples and skills and experience and imagination, that when that child stands among the lions and the wolves, and the leopards and the serpents, the little child will lead them. And those children, whose childhoods will end much earlier than any of us would hope, they're going to shake hands with the Mashiach. I promise to be available for some questions if anyone has, since we don't have to go to Kiddush. Are there any questions? Clarifications? Yes?
So what is your advice when you, I have little children, and I noticed that although I started my children watching TV, T-shirt price videos or little things like that when they were 2 or 3, now TV has moved on, and the language that is used in the cartoon channel is not what I thought, when I was growing up, which was completely different. So how do you basically, without the kid having a mental breakdown, how do you control it? You take the TV out, put it in the closet. How do you manage the kid's frustration, also knowing that there are other children, their friends who don't have those limitations at home?
I think you're asking a very good question. I think that the whole strategy of control is much, much more difficult because it is not being practiced in any consistent way across community, and children need socialization. And so the net is going to be as strong as its weakest patch. I would speak about 2 things. First of all, anything where you cannot isolate, you have to immunize. That means if your children, and this is my own thesis, I don't think the problems is what our children see. I think it's how we allow them to see it. And to me, that is the ultimate pornography. The ultimate pornography is unfiltered, uncritical apprehension, so that people become completely desensitized. It is very important to watch TV with your children. That at the end of a cartoon, if a character says, "shut up," you have to say, what'd you think about that? If you were that character's mother, what would you think about the way he talks? You can also say, we had this fight when my children were teenagers, and they wanted to watch movies. We were fairly liberal, which had some really rough language. The deal was, I'm not stupid enough to think you don't know all those words. But you are affirming that you can watch the television and not be affected by them. The minute I hear that language, it's out. So what I'm saying to the child is not, I need to keep you away from it. I need to teach you to recognize dirt versus nourishment. And as children get older, the ability to teach them to look at things critically, because a lot of the things that are declared safe just because they don't have sex and violence have terrible messages. I think among the worst things are some of these situation comedies that are rerun between 4 and 7, and particularly aimed at preteens, which all feature smart aleck kids with big mouths, and the laugh track supports them. You have to watch with them. The second strategy, Brenda, which I haven't had the nerve to unveil yet, but I hope will come out of this whole month. I'd like to see parents start talking to each other so that the children of each grade level, for example, will get together, the parents of each grade level children will get together once a month and talk about what do we want for our children. And if, as a group, we say, we want the kids to move, we're concerned that this and this is on the market, the kids are asking for it, maybe as a group, we don't feel that, and at least, if it's going to get in anyway, at least have a heads up. At least make people answer for it. And you know what? There are a lot of parents who desperately need some support because they feel like they're in it all alone. That becomes absolutely crucial when they're teenagers. You want to keep the drugs and stuff out of the community, you make sure that there is no place the kids can go for an unsupervised party. Because parents support and hold each other responsible. It's a strategy we used many years ago with great effect. Yes?
So taking that 10 steps forward to what I call the curse of the laptop, because I feel like it's a curse. How do you, and I know the answers are always, well, it has to be in a public area, which is all fine, and I get that, but when you live in an apartment and space is limited, that public space becomes way too public for homework and for other things, and we are faced with the fact that the laptop is everything, and it's a constant, and it's in a bedroom. It makes me uncomfortable. As much as I trust, and I do, it makes me uncomfortable, but now what? What do I do with that? Do I threaten? Do I sit next? You can't do that. A 15-year-old child, you can't sit next to them.
Well, when talking about a 15-year-old child, you're talking about something different, and you're talking about a child who, if you make it a power struggle, you will lose.
Right.
If not now, eventually, and eventually it's going to be soon.
No.
First thing you have to do is you have to ask that child, what are your values for yourself? So sometimes a kid who's staying up till 3 in the morning because they can't peel themselves away from Facebook, you have to say to them, is this what you want? Here's what this is going to do. You're going to sleep through 2 years of high school, and your grades are going to be in the crapper, and your college choices are really going to be affected. How can we help you keep promises to yourself? First, let's establish what you want for yourself. And you tell us how to support you. No, just flip it. Because if it's a matter of proving I'm a big shot, I'm independent, then you've placed a great burden on the other side. Everyone wants to be independent. Children have a lot of pride. You can't shame children. But if they understand that what you're working with them on is a function of your high opinion of them, and that you want to begin to move into the role of consultant, then there's a chance that when they're 25, they'll also ask, just tell me what you would do. Mommy, I'm facing a situation, I'm having trouble. It's also, by the way, one of the reasons why I believe in, whenever you can get it, in early inculcation about morning minyan. You tell them, I don't care what time you go to sleep on Saturday night. You want to go to sleep at 4 a.m., you go to sleep at 4 a.m., but as long as you're a chachris. If you're a chachris, I know you've taken responsibility. You want to come home after chachris and take a nap, come home afterwards and take a nap. But don't tell me how tired you are, because you did it to yourself. If you're man enough to stay up that late, you're man enough to peel your sorry carcass off the mattress and get it to shul. Not just throw on the tefillin, but get it to shul. And by the way, I think this is something which has to be dealt with girls as well. And I don't know that girls, different homes have different attitudes, but if a mom says, I will meet you at 9 o'clock in the living room for davening, that is when davening is happening in this house. And no matter what time you went to sleep, you will be beside me. I have your sitter prepared next to mine. That's one of the ways that we need to combat the zombie culture which has become adolescence. Kids routinely. They want to stay up until they have exhausted the parental gendarmes. And so they rule the night. And they end up paying for it till noon. And that whole culture is not good for kids. It's not good for them, even though the whole world is alive. 2 in the morning. Let's check out who's on Facebook. The whole world is on Facebook at 2 a.m. You know, about 4 they start to fall off. Don't try calling anyone's house before 11. Maybe one more question if anyone has. If not, I love you all for coming and for being so patient. And don't forget, those kids are going to shake hands with the Mashiach.
I only see the videos with lectures that you give. Is that online?